And sticking with basketball for a little bit more, and this was something that kind of got lost in the fold with all these football rumors and obviously being right in the middle of football season, still had to kind of focus on that the last week or so since Baylor didn't have any games. But last week they had signing day and got some good players through the door. Baylor did to sign their NLI. One player they didn't get is the one I'll start with, and that is Tre Johnson, the number one recruit in the 2024 class, shooting guard out of Lake Highlands. He's playing in Missouri this year for one of those schools. I don't know. He's actually going to be playing in Texas again this weekend in a tournament that starts on Black Friday. So if you want to still see him, go check him out. But he had narrowed his list down to Baylor and Texas as recently as last month, saying, hey, the best college basketball is being played here. Why would I go anywhere else? And last week, he committed to Rodney Terry and the Longhorns. I got to be honest with you guys. I was surprised by it. I was dejected by it, to be honest with you. But I was really surprised he ended up going with Texas. You just look at the track records of these programs the last couple of years, and by no means has Texas been bad. Of course not. But look at the basketball programs and the coaching staffs and the stability and the guys going into the league, and especially at the guard position, I'm thinking, really? I thought Baylor was a shoo-in at that point. When you narrow it down to those two, I was thinking, well, this is Baylor's to lose. And they were one of the first ones to offer him. They have been on the Tre Johnson train since day one. His dad played at Baylor, but his favorite player growing up, and now a guy he actually works out with in the summer, is Kevin Durant. So there was pretty good push-pull on each side in terms of influence. But I was surprised the way that Scott Drew develops these guards, the way he uses these guards, I thought would be super beneficial to Tre Johnson, who I thought would be working or playing a lot like Jacoby Walter is this year, more so than maybe a Keontae George, with that kind of length that he has on top of the athleticism and the way he can score at all places on the floor, realistically. I mean, he could be a slasher and a driver just as much as he is a three-point shooter. Whereas Keontae George was, a guy who could score from a lot of different places, but it lights out three-point shooter. And I thought of his offensive game a lot like someone like a Devin Booker or even a Jimmy Butler was the comparison that I liked. A guy who can just get to his spots, know where he needs to be offensively, know where he needs to be to score the rock. And so with that, I was surprised to see Texas. The stability they've had at head coach has not been great. Obviously, with Chris Beard having to leave the program in shame last year, now taking the job at Ole Miss, and Rodney Terry steered that ship pretty well. They made it to the Elite Eight. He's been there through a couple of different head coaches. Rodney Terry has. So I don't, not to say he's going to be a bad coach or anything. We just don't know a lot about him. And for a kid like Tre Johnson, who is obviously being recruited a lot by Chris Beard, to then step in and say, hey, I still like this program. Credit to Rodney Terry. That's a big win for UT to bring in the number one recruit in the nation. Who thought we'd be saying that in any sport? That it'd be a big win for UT to land the number one recruit over Baylor. But that's exactly what it was. We saw it with Yves Missi was put off by Chris Beard leaving. That he had it down to basically Baylor in Texas. And I think a big reason why he chose Baylor was just because Chris Beard wasn't going to be at UT anymore. And again, the development of guards, going in the lottery. Davion Mitchell and Keontae George, Jacoby Walter, Jeremy Sohan, point guard, Jeremy Sohan. He did play some guard at Baylor for a couple of games, but what an impact he's having with the Spurs at point guard. He's a unicorn at that position. But Baylor's been able to develop guards, to quote our guy Fran, more guards than Buckingham Palace. So they had a chance at the number one recruit in the nation for the first time ever. They miss out on it. So is Baylor going to miss having a guy like Tre Johnson? Look, you always want number one. I'm not going to say they're better off without him. But I think Texas needed that recruit more so than Baylor did. And the reason why, and something that kind of got lost in my frustration with not getting Tre Johnson, is they're bringing in two really good players. 2 4, 5-star players who signed last week, and Robert Wright and Jason Asemota. So is it one of those cases of, they didn't need him? No, but kind of. But kind of. So Asemota is a guy who I love watching play. He's just got NBA written all over him. Okay. I mean, obviously you do as a 4 or 5-star, but this kid, the 6'8" with the long wingspan, he upgraded. He moved on to Hillcrest, and dropped his average down from 22 to 16 points a game. At a much higher level of competition, he was still averaging 16 and 8. And this kid can slash and cut. And I think he is going to be a great on-ball defender at Baylor. Just that kind of build, which is something I was excited about for Tre Johnson as well, at that 6'6" from the guard position. But this is a wing. Jason Asemota is a wing guy who can be a better version of Jalen Bridges, I think. Jalen Bridges is a heck of a player. So you're getting a good one in Asemota. And the one who is lighting up the score sheets and the one making the headlines is actually Robert Wright, who was just all world when he was playing in Pennsylvania, led them to a state title and another state championship game, averaged over 20 points a game as a sophomore and a junior. I mean, this kid can light it up. And now he has also upgraded his high school game by going to Montverde, which you have heard of. It's one of the top programs in the nation. Ben Simmons was a Montverde guy, and he is still making plays there. Everyone around there loves having him. And he doesn't pop off the page or as high in the rankings as Asemota does, because he's only 6'1" and 180. But you watch this kid's tape, and you might not say, oh, pro prospect the way you do with Jason Asemota, but what you see is a basketball player, just a basketball player. So many times in these hoop mixtapes, you just see guys who are so athletic that they can't fail, right? Tre Johnson has a little bit of that. He's a better player than that, but I don't want to discredit him. But you see just the athleticism jumping off the page. The one that springs to mind for me was Nerlens Noel. Remember that name, Nerlens Noel, about 10, 12 years ago? Number 1 recruit in the country out of Tilton in New Hampshire, great prep program. And he ended up going to Kentucky, and he was just such a freak athlete that you almost didn't even know what his position was. He was a shot blocker who would slash to the basket, would sometimes handle the ball. So you didn't know if he was a small forward or a point guard or even a power forward. I think he's like 6'8", 6'6", 6'8", but with good size and athleticism. And he only played a year at Kentucky, and he was hurt in that year too. And he got to the NBA, and lo and behold, they didn't know what his position was. He was a shot blocker who was really athletic, not as athletic before the injury, and he could handle the ball a little bit. But he wasn't a shooter. He didn't have a defined offensive game. And a lot of guys are like that. The 4 or 5 stars coming out of high school, but you say this kid just has so much potential. Robert Wright has potential, but he's also the opposite of that. He is a basketball player. He's got a feel for the game. He is a good shooter. He's a good playmaker. You can just see it. You say that kid's a basketball player, not just an athlete who happens to play basketball. He is a basketball player. And I'm going to be saying that about him over and over and over again. And then they got this kid Boyed coming from junior college, who is an athlete who happens to play basketball, but that's only because he's still really raw. He's coming from St. Lucia. It's really only his second. This would be like his 3rd year playing organized basketball. And still in JUCO averaged 11 and 9 on 57% shooting. So raw, yes, but knows his role. And I think that to me sounds like Josh Ojenmuna is what that sounds like. Or even Jonathan Chamwa-Chachua sounds a lot like that. And as you could probably tell, Scott Drew can use those guys and use those guys well. And speaking of coaches, there's one who I love in college football who might well be on Baylor's radar.